I think most people misunderstood how long they might end up living. They misunderstood that just their EPF, for example, which their employer is contributing to, is not going to be enough. And I think the restrictions on the NPS, even though there are situations in which you can withdraw out parts of money, etc., actually work in your favor, because sometimes you might curse it at that point, but you then realize that because I was only allowed to withdraw an X amount of money, I sort of protected my retirement, which in hindsight may have been a great choice, but at that moment didn't look like the greatest idea. So the interesting part is that when market events happen, there are people who ask us saying, what should I do about my direct equity portfolio? What should I do about my mutual fund portfolio? Hardly anyone asks us saying, what should I do about my NPS portfolio?
When you pass on a mutual fund and your kid sells that mutual fund after inheriting it, they have to pay tax using your purchase price. Whereas when you pass on the same corpus through NPS, there is no taxation.
That's right.
Hello and welcome to Pension Pe Charcha, brought to you by Thefynprint and Protean. I am Neil Borate, your host for today and editor-in-chief at Thefynprint. In this series, we bring you the benefits and the little-known secrets of the NPS. We talk to its movers and shakers. We talk to ordinary subscribers, to advisors, and of course, the people who make the big decisions around the NPS. Today we have Vishal Dhawan, who is a very senior financial advisor in India, who's seen the evolution of the Indian investors over more than a decade. Welcome, Vishal.
Thank you so much, Neil. Pleasure being here.
So, Vishal, you've probably seen an entire generation of Indians go from starting working life and eventually hit retirement. Have you seen people plan properly for it? Like, how important is retirement planning?
So I think that's changed a little bit. I think when we started off 22, 23 years ago as an advisor, the awareness for retirement planning was sort of very limited. I think most people misunderstood how long they might end up living. They misunderstood that just their EPF, for example, which their employer is contributing to, is not going to be enough. And there were always these short-term immediate requirements of money which took precedence over a long-term goal like retirement. Yeah. I think we've seen that evolve over a period of time thanks to greater awareness campaigns, more products available to meet retirement needs. Yeah. And I think people have also seen and heard stories of people who have succeeded with having a retirement which has been tension-free from the money aspect point of view. Yeah. And they've also seen what's gone wrong if you haven't planned for it. So I think they've had both positive role models and negative role models, and that's made a big difference in awareness. So we've definitely seen that change. People come to us and now tell us that, it is in my top 2 or 3 goals, which wasn't the case earlier.
Yeah. And you would have also seen earlier generations relying more on the traditional family, children will support you, to funding your own retirement.
Yeah, certainly. I think, the desire to be independent has taken on a very different level of importance for people. And I think what people want to do is they want to be independent financially, and they also want to live independently. And I think both of these together sort of go hand in hand, because if you want to live independently, then you have to be financially independent as well. So I think that awareness has changed, and obviously we can see that even in the ecosystem with the sort of entry of senior retirement homes starting to come in, the social stigma involved with some of this starting to reduce. So I think this is a very positive evolutionary process where people are actually in a position to make a choice on how they want their retirement to be looking like. Unlike earlier, where it was sort of assumed that up to a certain point you will be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
And others will be sort of supported through your earnings. Yeah. And at a point in time, you will transition, and then the roles will reverse, and you will start becoming dependent. So I think that shift is a very important shift, and I think the more people realize it, that really retirement planning is about independence and flexibility.
Yeah.
Both of these will go hand in hand if you want to, do what you want to do through the rest of your life.
So Vishal, when my grandfather retired, his plan was basically to buy a bunch of flats, get rent from them, and fund his retirement that way. And I think that was the typical thing for his generation. When my parents retired, the mix had shifted to about 50% real estate and 50% financial assets. Have you seen that shift mirror in your clients? And how do people deal with sort of the perceived stability of real estate and rent, or gold for that matter, versus, say, stocks?
So I think a lot of the retirement architecture was actually driven by how family structures were at different points. So if you go back to your grandfather's time, probably you found that the acceptance of a joint family structure was very high.
Yeah.
When you went to your parents' generation, you did see a little bit of a split in that generation, but you still found that family members, like children, were likely to be in the same city or at least in the same country.
Yeah.
As you go to where we are today, it's very likely that you don't actually know where you're going to be and you don't know where your children are going to be. And therefore, what's happened is, as the family structures socially have changed, you've had to evolve your retirement architecture in terms of cash flows, etc., to take care of that. So one of the things that people have realized is that managing real estate is hard,
Especially when you're
especially if you're far away. And therefore, they've started to become practical about it, saying that yes, I have stability on one side, but I have the practical aspects of managing it on the other side. And it's not necessary that people really enjoy managing real estate. You don't enjoy that you have to get after the plumber to come to your house, or the electrician to get into your home, or the painting to be done. So I think people have said that one of the things that virtually I'm always going to be in is in a time deficit. And if I'm going to be in a time deficit, then I want things which are easy to handle and manage. And therefore, you've seen retirement architecture shift to mirror that particular need, where people say that they want more control on their time. Let's say if I want to make an investment decision, I don't have to be locked into a single place physically to make that decision. But if I want to get my plumbing done in my home, I have to sit inside my home and wait for my plumber to come to me, even though he's promised at 10 a.m. and doesn't arrive.
That's right.
So I think that shift is also getting reflected in the way investors are looking at their retirement. I think it's a gradual shift because there is also history, and very often, role modeling again is parents, grandparents, etc. But I think people have realized also that because their lifestyles have gone up, if they don't access the capital itself, which is what happens with real estate, because you live off the rent only, then maybe they will not be able to be as independent as they wanted to be. So I think that combination of awareness, practicality, and sort of okayness to move that needle a little bit, I think all of that has contributed.
Yeah. And I think even with my parents' generation, I have seen lots of my dad's friends, relatives, etc., their kids overseas. They themselves, after retiring, they spend a good 3-6 months overseas. And at that point, to deal with plumbing and maintenance issues is a huge hassle.
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt about it. And to add to that, the complexity of tax laws globally, where every single asset gets treated differently in the country in which you live and the country in which your children live. So I think everyone's sort of battling with higher complexity, and therefore trying to say, can I just keep things flexible and simple both, so that I can deal with it better?
Right. Now, Vishal, the other thing that has taken off in the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years is the concept of FIRE, financial independence, retire early, on the back of a booming stock market. How do you see this evolving? Is it practical, or you've seen a much longer period than just this phase? So, is it practical?
So I think it's practical. I think what people need to do is very clearly define what they want this financial independence, retire early, really to look like, beyond the numbers on what can make me independent.
Sure.
So I'm going to talk about two aspects that we see people struggle with. One is the definition of really what is going to be my lifestyle post retirement.
Right.
So while a lot of people talk about simplicity of lifestyle, it's important that they define that simplicity, because what ends up happening is there are many things when you're working which you get used to very quickly.
Right.
And what ends up happening is that you sort of do your estimations on the basis of those lifestyles.
Right.
And you might find that the moment you have much more time in your hand, that lifestyle feels inadequate. Because let's say if you work 6 days a week and you're off on a Sunday, you probably go out once a week.
Correct.
Now, if you're allowed to go out more times because you don't have anything else to do, you have a different problem. And the amount of money that you need is very different.
Correct.
The second is there are certain assumptions around what portfolio growth rates are going to be like, what life expectancy is going to be like. And I think a lot of that is really hard to project over very long periods of time. Okay. There is always going to be risks of getting the estimates wrong. And I think you can model very, very conservatively, but then you may not believe in that model yourself. So if you say a safe withdrawal rate in India is 2.5%, 3.5%, depending on which model you look at. But when we see how modeling is happening in the real world, people are saying, you know what, I can get 7-8% quite easily. And the problem is that's assuming a certain outcome on the day you retire, which you don't know what it's going to be. So we can see all these estimation risks playing out. And the second thing is people not giving enough attention to how they're going to manage their time in retirement.
Sure.
At the end of the day, if you have a calendar which has 24 hours free, a lot of the challenges that you will face, both mentally and financially, will come from the free time and what to do with it. And I don't think people are thinking deeply enough about it. They're giving a lot of attention to the numbers, but they're not giving attention to the other aspects around it. And therefore, we think at just the way you prepare those numbers out, model for different scenarios, etc., you also need to model for time management during retirement, especially if there are couples where one of them thinks this is really important and one of them says that, I love my work or I just want to continue to work. Because then even that partner who was your natural partner to spend time with is busy with doing other things. So it's a tough decision.
So Vishal, in India, there are so many financial instruments, direct stocks, mutual funds, PMS, AIF. Where does NPS specifically fit, especially in the retirement goal, with retirement goals?
So I think what we see actually from an investor's perspective is that very often he classifies investments into high risk and low risk buckets. He doesn't look at it from a product level view. And the sense that we get is somehow the NPS is thought about like an alternative to the PPF or the EPF.
Correct.
And the mutual fund, PMS, AIF, etc., is thought about at the other end, saying all the risk is sitting there.
Sure.
The reality is that while the PPF and EPF, by their very nature, have very little control that an investor has on what happens at the underlying level, the NPS gives you choice to decide how you want to have the underlying construct.
Correct.
And therefore, you could believe that your NPS is like a mutual fund with certain benefits and with certain restrictions as well. And those are both positive and negative.
Yes.
As an investor, therefore, the way to think about these vehicles is to actually go one level down and say, what are those asset classes sitting inside that vehicle? And how do I want these asset classes to talk to each other?
Correct.
Just like a thali, for example, where you want, even though proteins are the talk of town or talk of the town, you can't have a protein only diet.
Correct.
You need fats, you need carbohydrates, you need everything else. The same way in an investment basket, especially focused on retirement, you probably need multiple things to come together to create a robust retirement plan, which can look at many things.
So would you personally see NPS more as a mutual fund with certain features and restrictions than an EPF, PPF comparison?
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea to think about, what are the risks that run for all investors who think about retirement and planning for retirement. So we think there are two big risks that every investor is faced with. One is what I would call inflation drag, which is that can my retirement portfolio actually keep up with the rate of inflation? And this is not the rate of inflation which is consumer price inflation, put out by the government, but lifestyle inflation added on top of the CPI, because people have evolved over a period of time and spend money on very different things from what the CPI presents, even if it in its new avatar. The second risk is discipline risk, which is essentially that the more flexibility you have, very often your brain will process the short-term need much more clearly than the long-term need.
Absolutely.
So if these are the two risks, now the question comes saying that how do you position NPS, right? So one of the advantages of NPS clearly is that it allows you to choose instruments at an underlying level, which can actually beat inflation if you want to, because depending on your age, depending on the way that you want to invest in your NPS, etc., you can go all the way up to 75% in equity.
Correct.
And with the new frameworks that are in place, you can even go 100% if you need to.
Yes.
So in the MSF, that's right. So you have the option to sort of deal with the inflation drag in a way that you are comfortable with.
Sure.
With respect to flexibility, right, which is one of the big advantages. Like I said, with retirement, because it's very often a very long-term goal, there will always be other competing choices that will feel like, let me pull this money out, use it for this short-term goal, and then rebuild my retirement corpus again.
Right.
Now, that's good in a way because people like flexibility, but it removes discipline also in a certain way.
Sure.
And I think the restrictions on the NPS, even though there are situations in which you can withdraw out parts of money, etc., actually work in your favor, because sometimes you might curse it at that point.
Yeah.
But you then realize that, because I was only allowed to withdraw an X amount of money, I sort of protected my retirement, which in hindsight may have been a great choice, but at that moment didn't look like the greatest idea. So I would always think that, the NPS therefore is sort of an MF plus minus, depending on what you want to look at it. So if you create an exactly same asset class portfolio between NPS and mutual funds, the returns could look very similar. Now, depending on whether you like flexibility and you think you're very disciplined, so you will never touch your retirement corpus, you might just say, I love the MF because it gives me that. If you think that, no, I don't think I'm so disciplined, then maybe the NPS comes in. And that's why for most people, it will end up being an and decision, saying that I would build my retirement corpus through MFs and through NPS. And therefore, my retirement architecture, just like earlier on, we were speaking about the fact that you might have homes and financial assets becoming your retirement. The way we think about it now is financial assets will tend to dominate retirement portfolios. And within that, you will have mutual funds and NPS both sitting there, doing their respective roles because they have different roles to play.
Yeah. It's like the story in Greek mythology where the sailors tied themselves to the mast when they were going past the sirens, and so they weren't jumping into the water. And
that's right, absolutely. So you were forced to sort of do that.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
Right.
And in fact, with the whole current war situation, it just reminded me that why the restrictions are important. Because had I been 100% in equity, which was tempting in the last couple of years, I would have hurt a lot more emotionally with this war than 75%. And thankfully, I'm personally lower than 75% in equity and NPS. So I feel some relief that I'm a little bit less affected by the war volatility.
Yeah, certainly. I think it sort of controls behavior a little bit. But I think there's also one big advantage of the NPS, which I think gets a little underestimated, which is that if you have to move asset classes within the NPS, there is no tax incidence. Very often for investors who know theoretically that rebalancing is important, the tax angle to it or an exit load angle to it actually becomes a deterrent.
Correct.
Within the NPS, because you're able to move asset classes without a tax impact, I think that sort of helps ensure that you don't make the wrong decision just because of tax. And I think as a country we've always been very tax sensitive, and this sort of helps the NPS considerably.
Yeah. While we're on that subject, have you seen a change in investor behavior in the new regime? Because NPS is possibly the only instrument that's available in the new tax regime.
So I think we've certainly seen more awareness, especially amongst the higher earning investors, because clearly the contribution coming from the employer allows their that component to become at least tax deferred.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very valuable thing. I think if you go back and look at the history of retirement savings in other parts of the world as well, tax deferment does very often create the right behavior in terms of saving towards that particular goal. So I think that's a very valuable thing. I think our continued sort of struggle is that there is a little bit of constant change that's happening across tax regimes as well. So, we know that there is a, provision which has been put out saying that suddenly the old tax regime may again look like it's become more popular. So some of the lack of tax continuity actually becomes a challenge for investors because they're not able to figure out themselves. To a lot of people, they continue to save in instruments which are in the old tax regime, even though they're sitting in the new tax regime.
Yeah.
Because they're not able to really oscillate between these tax law changes very quickly. And we just do think that this whole opportunity for them to get a tax deferment makes the NPS a very, very powerful tool.
So Vishal, as you rightly said, NPS sits somewhere between EPF, PPF, and mutual funds. Use the term mutual fund plus minus. But on social media, there are all kinds of misconceptions about what NPS is, often anchored to what it used to be. So, what are the common misconceptions that you've come across?
So I think one is that it is a very inflexible tool, and I think one of the powers of the NPS is that over a period of time, it's brought in a lot of additional things which may have taken away from their simplicity a little bit, but have also given a wider choice to investors to make decisions which are optimized to their own requirement. I think one of the most powerful ones is the introduction of a systematic withdrawal plan equivalent, which means that you can draw out the money in portions exactly as you're going to require it, and you don't need lump sums of money to come out in large numbers. Because I think one of the things people underestimate when they get to their retirement is the stress that a large sum of money received at one point in time creates for them to figure out what is the thing to do. And it appears like if I make this decision wrong, my entire retirement is at risk. And I think most people aren't used to taking big decisions on anything very easily. It does create, brain freezes, if I may use that word.
And stress.
And stress, right? So I think, that's sort of the flexibility is certainly there. We already spoke about the fact that I can move asset classes internally. I can choose portfolio pension fund managers inside that. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. The second misconception is that this is a tax saving instrument, right? I think whatever tax break you get, whether you're using the old tax regime for the purpose, where you can still get a 50,000 rupees contribution tax break, or whether you're actually contributing through the employer route and getting a much better 14% of basic plus DA benefit. The real thing is it is a retirement tool, and therefore the starting point has to be saying how much do I really need for my retirement, and how much of that money will I get supported through the NPS. Now, all of a sudden, the conversation is not about 50,000 rupees. It's not about 14% of basic plus DA or 10% of basic plus DA if I'm in the old tax regime. It is about optimization. And we've seen this play out in various ways. You can see how people are underinsured on health insurance because they've always believed that if I get a premium benefit up to a certain level, I will find the sum assured on the same basis.
Yes.
And we see that same misconception playing out on the NPS, where the tax breaks will decide how much I contribute, which I think is a very fundamental challenge. The third is because EPF, PPF, and NPS get talked about in the same breath as retirement long-term solutions.
Right.
Very often people imagine that they are same things and similar things. So, if my PPF account today gives me 7.1% tax-free, my EPF gives me 8.25% tax-free. Therefore, from NPS, I must be getting somewhere around 7-8% tax-free. Now, the NPS is dramatically different. But because it is talked about in the same breath, people aren't able to distinguish. And that's why I continue to believe that the real education will come when people say, go behind the veil, look underneath, pick up that bonnet of the NPS and look inside at the engine on what's happening in there. And then you'll suddenly realize that this can be a very strong horsepower SUV, or it can be a slow old car, depending on what you want it to be.
Absolutely. Can you give us some client case studies about how people have used the NPS?
So I think there are 2 or 3 things that happen which we see very often with the NPS, right? One is just the nomenclature which comes with it, which is pension, right? So the interesting part is that when market events happen, very often people's attention goes to things that don't have a nomenclature around it. And therefore, they worry about their direct equity portfolio, they worry about their mutual fund portfolio, etc., because there is no nomenclature which says this is retirement. But with the NPS, they just assume that it is for my retirement, and therefore, if I'm 40 years old and there is geopolitical stress somewhere, hopefully this is not going to last for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that itself makes them behave very rationally with the NPS. That they look at that as a long-term vehicle, and the kind of decisions that they will make on it will have a long-term bent by default versus having a short-term bent. So when we get these events happening, there are people who ask us saying, what should I do about my direct equity portfolio? What should I do about my mutual fund portfolio? Hardly anyone asks us saying, what should I do about my NPS portfolio? And we've seen this live happen in the last few weeks. So that's definitely one of the advantages of the NPS. The second is for a lot of high income earners, like we discussed, that tax deferment has two values. One is that it saves you your tax today, which means that you are able to have more money available, which can compound. And that's a big benefit when you're doing long-term savings.
Correct.
And the second is hopefully at the time that your tax actually becomes payable. Part of it, of course, assuming that tax laws remain the same, is anyway going to come back to you tax-free.
Correct.
But even the part which is taxed, hopefully will get taxed when your income numbers are lower. And therefore, you are getting the natural benefit of withdrawing at the time when your tax is lower as well.
Correct.
So both these are typically where we find investors that we have get the most benefits of where the NPS comes from. I think the changes within the portfolio tax-free, I think over a period of time, they understand it. But I don't think they ascribe too much importance to that at this particular stage. Even on the expense side, even though the NPS is a very cost-efficient, low-cost product, I don't think that's the reason why they look at the NPS. They're thinking about it saying that on a net of cost basis, what is serving my purpose? And I think what they've concluded is, you need multiple engines around your retirement, and one of them is the NPS.
Absolutely. Vishal sir, there have been multiple reforms in the NPS of late, but possibly two ones that certainly hold my attention. One is the change in withdrawal from 60 years to a 15-year vesting period, whichever comes earlier.
Right.
The other is the introduction of MSF schemes, where you can, as you said earlier, go up to 100% in equity. How do you view those two?
So I think, the withdrawal flexibility is an important one because depending on tax efficiency and corpus sizes at retirement, you want to have flexibility to decide when to withdraw. To me, there are two extremes on withdrawal. One is the flexibility to withdraw in 15 years. The other is to defer withdrawal till the age of 85. Now, what it allows us to do, and if you see where the NPS started off, it always said that, everyone in this world has a 60 retirement, okay, which was not and is not the reality. So if you look at how the NPS has shifted, it's actually gone out and said that you choose how you want your retirement to be, and your product will not decide, whether you will retire at 60 or, in 15 years from today or at the age of 85. This flexibility, I think, makes people feel more comfortable with any product, because if you give them flexibility, they make the right decisions. If you lock them in, imagining there is only one view of the future, it takes away from them. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think, what we suspect is a lot of people are actually going to gain because they will actually start to withdraw from their NPS at 70, 75, 80, 85, or may also end up literally using it as an inheritance tool to pass on to the next generation. With respect to the MSF, I think it has certainly, I would say, complicated things a little bit for individuals. I think it's given them flexibility, but it's also given them a lot of choice. And the challenge for a lot of people is that choice, because you now can have multiple pension fund managers, you can go with 100% equity if you want. I think what it's done is it's taken away from some of the simplicity that the NPS came with. And one of the things that's worked globally is the ability to, keep some of these products simple because you can nudge them in a particular direction.
Right.
So I think the way I would look at the MSF is that if you are an evolved investor, if you're someone or you are someone who has good quality advice by his or her side, I think the MSF is giving you a lot more options. Of course, the challenge for everyone going into MSF today is that there'll be very limited track records when you go in. So you will have to wait to see those track records get built up because you want to be able to, go in when those track records are there ideally. But for those who are not advised or who are not very aware, they may want to wait carefully to say that let this develop in the way that it's supposed to develop. let me go to the all citizen model that exists or the employer led model that exists today. Let me use that as my place to first discover the merits and the advantages of the NPS, and then use the MSF subsequently, because I now have a good sense on how it works.
You made an interesting point about inheritance, and not many people know this, but when you pass on a mutual fund and your kid sells that mutual fund after inheriting it, they have to pay tax using your purchase price. Whereas when you pass on the same corpus through NPS, there is no taxation.
That's right. And there's also the other advantage, right? That, I mean, if you look at the NPS evolution, NPS is now trying to literally move from cradle to grave, right? Just as a concept, because they also introduced the NPS Vatsalya out there, coming in and saying that, maybe you want to save for your child also using that structure. Now, it's a great model from an education point of view. We are a little worried that because there's sometimes a sort of blinded love for children, people may end up compromising their own retirement to save for their children's retirement. And I think there needs to be a balance there, saying that, while it's great to support your children and make them, wealthy or sufficient, you also have to probably take care of your own needs. So I think using the NPS Vatsalya prudently and judiciously will also be a very important element.
So, Vishal, there are two types of accounts in the NPS, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Both, of course, have different objectives. Tier 1 is more for retirement, Tier 2, you can use more as a savings account if you wanted to. How do you see them, and how have you seen clients using them?
So we think clearly the awareness of Tier 2 is very limited. People are more open to using other structures for that flexible requirement that they have, and they like the Tier 1 because of its retirement orientation and the tax breaks that you get through that. So I would say that there is a very specific role that Tier 2 accounts may play for certain investors. I think for people who aren't very disciplined with money lying around in their savings accounts, because they tend to spend it, or they tend to today also be exposed to risks around fraud, etc., which have become rampant. I think the Tier 2 account has a role to play, because it just moves money out of that uncontrolled easy access model into a controlled access model. It gives them flexibility inside it also to decide what they want to do. But to us, when we think about it today, investors are thinking more about it as a parking vehicle rather than as an investment vehicle.
Sure.
And I think what ends up nicely happening with that is that for a lot of people who hesitate in going into vehicles that are investment vehicles until they've seen the process work around it, I think it gives them confidence if they can see that that money can go in, it can come out. I have some control, I can do what it is, because then you make the bigger decisions easier, because you can actually test it out, see it for yourself. Because what ends up happening with the Tier 1 accounts is it's literally largely a one-way model at the start, which you can contribute in there. But if you have to take out money from there, you will have to go through, explaining why you need the money, how much you can withdraw from it, etc., etc. So I think I would call it a bit of a familiarity creator rather than an investment vehicle at this point.
Now, one more thing, Vishal, any financial vehicle also depends on how good the plumbing inside it is. And Protean, of course, is one of the largest CRAs in NPS and therefore governs a lot of the NPS plumbing. So, how has your experience been with that, with the plumbing side of it?
So I think if you look at the role of a CRA, right, a central record keeping agency, which is what Protean is, there are going to be three phases in that plumbing. One is when you want to start your account, you want to go into the NPS system, you will get issued what is called a PRAN, a permanent retirement account number.
PRAN, yeah.
Right? Now that PRAN, obviously, if you are able to get access to that PRAN very easily, or if you're doing it yourself, there is a set of simplistic guidelines that are explained, saying that do step 1, step 2, step 3, and it'll be with you.
Correct.
I think your confidence in any system goes up, because especially when you're putting money away from a long-term perspective. Yeah. So what we've seen is that part of that process works very efficiently. We've not heard of people saying that, it's very hard to open an account. So getting that PRAN, whether it's an ePRAN or a physical card, we've generally heard very good things about how that system works.
And it's improved over time. Like I remember when I opened my NPS account, I had to courier the documents. Now it's all possible online.
That's correct. So it's a very efficient system. The second is the record keeping aspect of it, because what ends up happening is that you will contribute at different points in time. You want to know if the markets fell yesterday and you have a 75% portfolio. You want to know what happened to my NPS accounts. That record keeping system and how it is displayed back to the investor is very efficient. And then the third stage is really the stage where if you run into a problem, is there a support system at the back end which can actually give you responses within a reasonable period of time? I think if you look at the plumbing architecture of the NPS, they've largely got that right. And obviously, a lot of this is also coming with low cost, even though the costs may be different across CRAs, but in general, the costs are low. And therefore, when you sort of look at the role of the CRA and what they're doing, we think for a new product and retirement savings, because of its long-term orientation, if you got the plumbing wrong, I think the offtake of that product would have been much worse than what it is today.
I think one interesting thing about NPS statements especially is they give you the XIRR.
That's right.
It's very hard to find in most other financial instruments.
That's correct. Absolutely. And it's such an important element, because if you're going to contribute on an irregular time frame, you need to know what my XIRR is, and not just know I've put 10 lakhs and the value is now 14 lakhs.
Correct. Thank you for watching Pension Pe Charcha with the Fine Print. And Vishal, thank you so much for coming here and giving us, especially from an advisory standpoint, an overview of the NPS.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me over.
If you have any comments or feedback, please put those in the comments to the video, and stay tuned for the next episode.